Awesome. Well, it's 11:05. I know people have busy days, so let's get started on the first part of our three-part webinar series, Protecting Your Child's Financial Resources. This first webinar is going to be going through the typical financial roadmap that families with special needs experience from a 30,000-foot view. This particular webinar is not going to get into the nitty-gritty specifics or some examples. That is what webinar number 2 and number 3 are going to be. Where webinar number 2 is everything Social Security, where we'll be going over traditional Social Security, Social Security disability insurance, and SSI, and how your child may be eligible for SSDI through your work record, as well as when you start collecting Social Security, how that may impact your child long term. And the third webinar, we'll be going over able accounts and special needs trust, when to use them and how to use them most effectively. I want everyone to know that this is being recorded. This will be available to anyone for free. Feel free to share this out. We'll be posting it online and also send it to your email afterwards. But because it is being recorded, if you have your camera on, this might be a good time to turn the camera off if you don't want your face in the recording. And then lastly, we will have Q&A time at the very end. I have my colleague Andrea who is helping me monitor the chat. So feel free to send your questions in through the chat, and Andrea will be able to read those at the very end during the Q&A section. Well, my name is Rhett Beal. I'll be your host today, and I'm a financial advisor for families with special needs, helping parents like yourselves ensure that you have enough financial resources for your lifetime as well as your child's lifetime, utilizing the private and public resources available to you. And I think it's really important to understand why I created this niche and why I'm doing this webinar series and my heart behind it. And it really stems down to a family member. Just like many of you on this call, we get into this because of a family member. And for me, it's my brother-in-law. And this is my wife's twin brother, Jordan, in the photo. And Jordan actually holding my wife and I's first child last March. And unfortunately, Jordan had a brain tumor at age 5. And from battling the cancer brain tumor, it significantly stunted his growth and development, where he will need some form of lifetime help, whether that be managing finances, managing a household, and just making sure his overall well-being is in good order. And I got into this because around family gatherings, we would be on vacation, we would be at holidays, we would be having conversations about anything you can imagine, and out of nowhere, my mother-in-law would just bubble up and say, "Hey, you guys are going to be taking care of Jordan, right?" And it would make me pause for him, like, that was random. And this happened 2 or 3 times, and it really stuck out to both my wife and I. And so we had the conversation like, hey, do we want to be the ones that help Jordan in the future when our in-laws can no longer do it? And we said, yes, of course, we want to be those people. And as a financial advisor, financial planner, I wanted to be prepared. And I'll tell you, I thought I was well suited to be the one to prepare that for us, to make sure that if anything happened to my in-laws, we'd have a smooth transition. And I'll be the first to tell you that we were not prepared. I knew very little, and it made me unsettled and nervous. And so I started having informational interviews with a lot of families. I started doing research into what resources are out there for people, and started doing research into what other financial advisors are out there. And all of it really opened my eyes. And through that research process, I found that there were only 6% of families who had a coordinated and communicated plan, and I was one of them that fit the 94% with no plan. And so I wanted to do something about that, and I dedicated my profession to helping families with special needs through sound financial advice. I had to solve it for my family. I wanted to help a lot of others too. And so all I ask in return for this webinar series or any of the newsletters that you'll get from me is that you pay it forward. Share the information you learn with others. Let others know that I am here so that we can help them with their specific situation. other families can be prepared, and we can change that statistic so that there are many, many, many more than only 6% of families who have a coordinated communicated plan. So for today, right, what are we going to cover through this first webinar series? We're going to go over from the 30,000-foot view, SSI, able accounts, SSDI, and special needs trust, covering a lot. Each one of these we could have full seminars for, and that's why we made this a 3-part series. Again, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty specifics. We will do specific examples and scenarios, how to maximize it for your family in the other 2 webinars. This is the 30,000-foot view. What are they, and when do you typically experience it in your lifetime, so that you know when to start really paying attention and focusing and planning for it. For example, most experience SSI for their child when their child turns 18. That pivotal 18 years of age is when a lot of changes come into play. And most families experience that when their child turns 18. There are situations when your child could be eligible for SSI prior to them being 18, but that will be really dependent on the parent's income and resources. Once they turn 18, it no longer has any dependency on the parent's income and resources. Then able accounts. Able accounts traditionally come in play when you start collecting SSI, if you need to start collecting SSI to store excess resources. And then moving down the financial life journey, when you as the parents are starting to look towards retirement and collecting Social Security yourselves, your children may be eligible for disabled adult child Social Security benefits through SSDI or Social Security disability insurance. And lastly, special needs trust, right? We often say, hey, get a special needs trust established now, because you never know when things are going to happen. But typically, in most scenarios, the special needs trusts are unfunded until both you as the parents pass away or your call home date, and then the inheritance flows into the special needs trust, and that is an excluded resource to make sure it protects the government benefits that are available to them. So the first one we're going to look at is Social Security, right? And something that really is fascinating to me about Social Security is that there are over 60 million people, or 1 in 5 in the US, who receive monthly Social Security checks. And of those 60 million people, 1/3 of them are disabled, dependents, or survivors. That makes Social Security the most important economic security system in our country. I know there's a lot of fears and news headlines that people think this is going to go away, it's going to run out, I need to collect it as soon as I can. Could it? Yes, I am a strong believer that it's highly unlikely and political suicide to let this run out when 1 in 5 people in the US utilize it, and then the other 4 out of 5 will use it in the future when we retire, and we're paying into it now. They've had to make changes to Social Security in the past. They'll have to make changes to Social Security in the future to make sure that it is more sustainable long-term and adapts to the changing environments. But something that's really unfortunate, because it is so large, 2 out of 3 families don't maximize their Social Security benefits. I personally believe the reason for this is that there are just a meager 567 ways to file for Social Security. 567. There's a reason why 2 out of 3 people are unable to maximize the benefits that are available to them. It's complex. There's a lot of different programs and a lot of different terminology. And so in this seminar and the next seminar, I'm going to help you maximize that for your family, give you clarity so that you understand the truth of how to utilize it for your family in your specific situation. But for this webinar, we're going to be talking about it from the 30,000-foot view. What are the primary components of Security? What are the 2 different programs for you to think about for your child? And the 2 primary programs are a needs-based program, which is SSI, and an earnings-based program, which is traditional Social Security during retirement, as well as Social Security disability insurance. SSI comes out of the general fund. It does not come out of the traditional Social Security pension fund. And SSI is intended to support or supplement our most vulnerable with limited income and resources. So really those who are unable to earn sufficient wage for themselves, maybe don't have work history. That's what SSI is for. And then there's earnings-based benefits, which were intended to support families during retirement, or if you were working and you become disabled, be able to tap into those resources. The first one we'll look at is the needs-based and means-tested program. And this means-tested and needs-based program is, again, for our most vulnerable. When to start considering it for your family? You start considering this in two scenarios. One, you have a child under 18, you have really, really limited income and resources, and you need additional income source. SSI may be available to you. The second, which is the more common, is the month after your child turns 18 years old. And a few tricks here if you have not started applying for SSI yet, and you are up in the air of how much your child may or may not be able to work, I highly recommend that you apply for SSI first and then go look for the jobs second. And the reason for that is SSI is 100% based on one's ability to work. It does not matter what the disabling condition is, whether it's cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, fragile legs, autism. That's not part of the definition of disability. It truly is, are they able to work and earn a substantial gainful activity level or a sufficient income to manage their finances or provide for themselves. And so if you are up in the air of whether your child can, apply for SSI first and then the job second. I have a client whose son would muck horse stalls at their neighbor's house and get about $10 every time he would do that. Well, Social Security said, oh, well, look, he's able to work, and denied him Social Security. They had to go through 3 rounds of appeals process, including going to hiring an attorney prior to being approved for Social Security, where it would have been much easier if he would on the front end applied for it and then go look for job seconds. So who is eligible for this, right? The key thing, like I said earlier, is someone's ability to work, but also they need to have a disabling condition that's expected to last 12 plus months. So there are some intellectual and developmental disabilities which have been your whole life. That clearly qualifies. If there was a car accident or traumatic brain injury, right, they're really going to look at it. How long is this condition expected to last? The income resource limitations, what is that? So if you look at the Social Security website, they have this phrase called the substantial gainful activity level, where if you have someone who's earning above SGA, then they would no longer be eligible for SSI. And in 2024, that is $1,550 net of impairment-related work expenses. There are some nuances to that, which I'll get into in the second webinar. But in general, let's just say your child's receiving SSI. If they're also working and earning $1,000 a month, they'll be okay, right? They'll be able to work and receive SSI at the same time. And for every $2 of earned income, it'll reduce SSI $1. What are the limited resources? Well, you can't have more than $2,000 in a person's name or in your child's name. That has not been amended since the 1980s. So if you have $2,001 in a bank account, then your child would be ineligible to receive SSI for that month. That does not mean ever, but for that month. Or if your child's turning 18 and they have $10,000 in bank account, we got to figure out how to spend that down or move it into other excluded resources. But there is good news. There are excluded resources out there, such as Able Account Special Needs Trust, if they own a primary home or own a vehicle. Those don't count as part of that $2,000 resource limit. It really is looking at like bank accounts or retirement accounts or any type of investments. And again, this is a needs-based program. There's no work history required. And what are the benefits for 2024? In 2024, the federal benefit is $943. This is adjusted for inflation every year. And if you're in California, you get a supplemental income benefit of a couple $100, where your benefit would be $1,183. You'll notice in the chat, Andrea posted a link to the blog post that I post every year at the beginning of every year, which shows the income limits and resource limits for the year. After this, click on that link. It's a great resource. If you're part of our newsletter, you'll be receiving that moving forward. Keep a close eye on it, because as things change year over year, you can keep up to date on that through it. Another thing to know, as long as you're receiving $1 of SSI, you will be approved and eligible for Medicaid or Medi-Cal in California. Just $1. So if you have a child who's working, and let's just say, again, they're earning $1,000 and also getting SSI, they're still eligible for Medi-Cal. What are some frequently asked questions? Well, the first one, which we already covered a little bit, can my child work and remain eligible for SSI? Yes. If your child can work, I highly encourage you to let them work, right? Don't allow government benefits to restrict your son's or daughter's ability to work and become really that active member in society, right? I am a full believer that going out and being a part of the community through employment will increase self-esteem, involvement in the community, and also they'll earn more money than what they'll have on SSI. So there's so many benefits to it, and there are ways to have the safety nets in place to be able to make sure that your child is also protected if something happens. So yes, they can work and still receive SSI. There is an offset. Again, it is for every $2 of earned income, SSI will drop $1. Many of you may have also seen that your SSI benefits are below the $943 at the federal level, or the $1,183, and it may be reduced, and your child is not working. Well, they call that ISM, right? Or in-home support and maintenance. It's probably because your child's living in your home, or you are paying for their rent and you're paying for their food. Well, SSI is specifically designed to pay for food and shelter. And so if you are paying that, the government's saying, hey, well, they don't need as much, even though we all know, what are you going to get in California or even outside California with $1,000 a month? Not much. There is a way to work around this. The way to work around this is have your child pay you rent. And you can have a flat rent rate of, let's just say, $500 to you, the parent, have a contract, notify Social Security, and by doing so, you will remove that in-home support and maintenance and get the full benefit amount available to you. And if that's not something you are doing yet, by doing so, you'd get about $3,700 more per year. It's a great resource, great benefit, and something to take advantage of. And what you do with that rent income as a parent, well, maybe it is to supplement expenses around the house, or you can build it, you can put it in something like an ABLE account, which we'll get to in just a moment. And the big question people ask too is, how do I protect excess buildup, right? If you're receiving SSI and it's going to a bank account, and that bank account's starting to go over $2,000, what do I do? Well, there's a resource for that. There's a tool for that, and they're called ABLE accounts, right? Or Achieve a Better Life Experience account, which is a tax advantage savings account for individuals with disabilities. And the money stored in an ABLE account is seen as an excluded resource for means-tested government benefits. I am a fan of ABLE accounts. They act like Roth IRAs. You're contributing after-tax money, but it can grow tax-free and be used tax-free as long as it's used for qualifying disability expenses. And here are some of the logistics around ABLE accounts, right? The disability onset needs to be prior to age 26. So unfortunately, if you have a child or you yourself were in a car accident at age 27, you would not be eligible to open up an ABLE account. But if you had a disability onset prior to age 26, you may be eligible. There is good news. They are changing the onset date to 46 starting in 2026. Why they're not just doing that right now, I have no idea. Why they're waiting an extra 2 years makes no sense to me, but that's the rules, and unfortunately I can't change the rules. So if you have a child with a disability, And what is the definition of disability? It's something that's medically determinable, physically or mentally, which has a marked and severe functional limitation. Right? If your child is on SSI, well, that proves it. If your child is not on SSI and they're working, well, then I highly recommend having a doctor's note and saying, what is the physical impairment? Are they in a wheelchair? Are they blind? Hard of hearing? What are the components? And something to note, this is not a Social Security program, right? When you open an ABLE account, they're not going to come check and say, hey, what is the disabling condition? You can open it on your own. So the burden of proof is on you. If the IRS, because it is monitored by the IRS, ever comes to audit you. So again, if your child is on SSI or has been approved for that, don't worry about it. If your child is not on SSI and never has been on SSI, then have a doctor's note and just have it on file or have the medical records and you'll be totally fine. Something important to note, you do not need to be receiving any government benefits to open an ABLE account, right? If there is a disabling condition, you can open an ABLE account and use it like a Roth IRA. Great tool. Who can contribute to it? Another great feature. Anyone can contribute to it, right? It's a great place to store excess savings, whether working or not. And also parents, friends, family, anyone can contribute to it, but it's cash only. And for 2024, you can contribute up to $18,000 into it for the year. This will be amended for inflation annually. And again, if you're following my newsletter, you'll see that updated every year as I update it annually. And there is a benefit if your child is working and they're not part of an employer-sponsored plan, they can contribute additional money above that $18,000 up to $14,580, right? Great resource, great place, and tax-free growth can be used tax-free as long as it's for qualified disability expenses. What are qualified disability expenses? If you read the definition, it doesn't make much sense. And the reason why it is difficult to comprehend is because it is so vague. But if you look at the rulings from the IRS, its vagueness is very intentional. They're not wanting to get into the nitty-gritty details. They really want it to be used for those who need it and can take advantage of this. So, for example, your child can use it for basic living expenses, including food and shelter. Your child can use it for vacations. They can use it for education, transportation, assistive technologies, health, you name it. They can use it for most things. Where you can get in trouble is if you, the parents, are using the money towards your own benefit, or it's really for things that aren't enhancing their life in some way. I do recommend that you somewhat keep track of the expenses, just so if you ever did get audited, you have that proof. But in general, it's very vague, and it's intentionally so. And there is an additional benefit about ABLE accounts, particularly if you're someone worried about how much your child's going to spend out of that account. There are TrueLink cards. If you're on a CalAble plan, I believe it's a UBS Bank prepaid card. And with the prepaid card, you can determine where expenses are paid or restrict where some money is spent. And you can also pre-fund and say, hey, it's only going to have a few $100s on it so that they don't go spend thousands of dollars or abuse it. There is a lot of control in it that also gives your child freedom to be able to use the prepaid card, Visa card, when they're out and about with their friends or in the community, right? Really, really incredible. Something important to know is only the first $100,000 in an ABLE account is seen as an excluded resource. And that's important for means tested government benefits. If your child's not on any means tested government benefits like SSI, then it can go up to $529,000, but only the first $100,000 is an excluded resource. And a big question I often get is, well, what happens if my child passes away with the money left in it? It is a little bit of a gray area, and it's different in every state. In some states, there is a Medicaid payback. So if your child is receiving Medicaid services, well, the first person to get paid back or the first entity to get paid back is Medicaid or Medi-Cal. In California, there is no Medi-Cal payback. but the money goes into your child's estate. And then however it's distributed out of the state is dependent. Fortunately, if your child's estate is small enough, then they'll be able to apply for a small estate affidavit and not have to worry about Medicaid payback. But if your child's estate, or if your estate, because you worked and you had a settlement or whatever, is above a certain threshold, then there may be a Medicaid payback provision even in California, as it flows out of the CalAble account into one's estate, and then from the estate, the Medicaid or Medi-Cal may look at that estate and may go after a payback. But again, if it's below certain thresholds, then you can file a small estate affidavit. Closing up ABLE accounts, we're going to look at the next part of the financial journey. Remember, SSI and ABLE accounts traditionally come into play right around age 18, where SSI is, again, income. ABLE accounts is a great place to store excess resources or excess cash. And then further along the financial journey, you may have access to SSDI or Social Security Disability Insurance. And this usually comes into play when you as the parents are looking towards a retirement and start collecting Social Security yourself, or if you become disabled prior to retirement. Or I'll get into a third scenario, which my brother-in-law falls into. He's paying in Social Security himself. He is not eligible underneath his parents' work record. But if he has something happen to him or he's no longer able to work any longer, he would be able to receive SSDI on his own work record. And again, this is earnings based. And the great thing about it being earnings based is that there are no income limits, right? Vastly different than SSI. There are no income limits, or excuse me, I messed that up. There are income limits, but there are no resource limits, right? If you are earning or your child's earning income above a certain threshold, they may not be eligible for SSDI, but you can have as much savings as you would like and resources you like. There's no limit to the resources under this program. And so how does this program work? Well, there's a few different features. One, it's based on one's work record. So unless you're working for some specific government entities, most people are paying into Social Security or have taxes withheld for Social Security every paycheck. What are the requirements to be eligible for this? One, the disability onset under the parent's work record needs to be prior to age 22. So if there was a traumatic accident that happened at age 23, unfortunately, they would not be eligible underneath the parent's work record. But if the disability onset was prior to age 22 and they've never earned above the substantial gainful activity level, for example, if they've always been on SSI their entire life, it's highly likely they've never earned above substantial gainful activity level, then they could be eligible for SSDI based on the parent's work record. When to apply? Well, under the parent's work record, you apply when you as a parent start collecting Social Security. If it's under your own work record, or for my brother-in-law situation, because he works at a local grocery store, he's paying into Social Security. He's had a minor stroke, and if he has other incidences happen and he's no longer able to work, then he would start collecting it on his own work record as soon as that disabling condition prevents him from being able to work, right? And looking deeper at the parents' benefits, how much potential benefits are out there for your child underneath the parent's work record, right? And this is called disabled adult child benefits. While living and the parents collecting Social Security, your child may be eligible for up to 50% of your full retirement age benefit amount. So it doesn't matter if you start collecting at 62, 65, 70, your child would get 50% of your FRA or full retirement age benefit amount, right? If you look at your Social Security statement, you can see that and you can roughly estimate about 50%. If you have a disabling condition yourself prior to retirement, and you have to go on SSDI for yourself, your child could also collect Social Security Disability Insurance because you are collecting Social Security. And then after you pass away, your child would bump up to 75%. And the good news is your child will get the greater of either parent, whether they are together or not together. Get the greater of either parent as soon as the first parent starts collecting Social Security. There is one caveat to be wary of that may bring the benefit below the 50% threshold. If you have one parent was working and the other parent was stayed at home and did not pay into Social Security themselves, there may be a family maximum payout on the other family members that bring it slightly below that 50% number. To know that and to dive into that deeper, we would really need to do a one-on-one meeting to understand what your guys' your benefits are, because it really is a deeper dive. I often get asked, can you be on SSI and SSDI at the same time? The answer is yes. SSDI will reduce SSI benefits 1-for-1, less $65. But let's just say your child's SSDI benefit is $500. Well, it'll just reduce SSI by $500, and you really won't see that much of a difference there. There is a great benefit about your child being on SSDI, and that is after 2 years, they would be eligible for Medicare. And Medicare, you can't have Medicare and Medi-Cal at the same time. Medicare is traditionally much, much better at the routine healthcare services and doctor visits. It opens up your available pool of doctors available. Most people like that a lot better. But the downfall of Medicare is it does not provide long-term care services. So if you're getting in-home support services or any other long-term care benefits, you don't get that through Medicare. You get that through Medi-Cal. And fortunately, if your child goes on SSDI, and let's just say it's $1,500 a month, and it completely eliminates SSI, well, your child will not be eliminated from Medi-Cal simply because they went from SSI to SSDI. There is a specific rule for that. It's called the Pickle Amendment. For disabled adult children, you are safe there. You don't need to be concerned if the only reason why they wouldn't be eligible for Medicaid or Medi-Cal is because they just went from SSI to SSDI. So your child is protected there. Moving on from ABLE accounts, I want to get into special needs trusts. And from SSDI, I want to get into special needs trusts. And this is kind of the final part of most people's financial journey. And this is typically when the parents pass away or their call home date, the inheritance flows into a special needs trust. And what I want to highly encourage is do not disinherit your child experiencing disabilities, right? I have heard often where parents say, hey, we don't have them on any of our retirement accounts or any of our trust. It's all going to siblings, and the siblings are going to help them. Well, there is a big risk to that. What happens if that sibling gets in a divorce? Well, now those assets are split 50-50. What happens if that sibling passes away? Fortunately, now those assets are going to the next generation who may not be as prudent with helping out your child with disabilities. What if there's a lawsuit on their property? Well, under a lawsuit, their personal assets may be at risk. And also the assets that you set aside for your child with disabilities may be at risk. And finally, bankruptcy. If there's a bankruptcy incident that happens, right, it's not protected from creditors. So there are tools and resources available where you do not need to disinherit your child. Your child can receive an inheritance, it still be protected from means-tested government benefits, and also protected from creditors and not have these concerns of divorce, death, lawsuits, or bankruptcies, right? And it is ABLE accounts and special needs trust. What is a special needs trust? It's a special kind of trust that helps preserve and pass assets, wealth, and income for individuals with special needs. Something to know. This is just a holding vehicle, right? If you have gone to an estate attorney already, or if you're thinking about going to the estate attorney, to have a special needs trust drafted, just because it's drafted, it doesn't mean it's funded, right? You still have a lot of considerations that go into play, which is how are you going to fund it? How much do you need to go in there to fund it? And who's going to help manage it? There's a lot of other planning aspects tied to it beyond just having the trust set up. And we'll talk about that more in depth in the third webinar. And if you've ever had a conversation with me, or if you ever have questions on this, reach out to me and I will help you along that planning process and give you guidance. What are the benefits of special needs trust other than what we've already talked about? Again, it's exempt from means-tested government benefits, assets protected from creditors, and the assets inside that trust are used for the sole and specific benefit of your child with disabilities. And it does not only need to receive cash. It could receive just about any type of asset, including real estate, including Bitcoin, including stocks and bonds, or closed-end business, you name it, it can receive it, including retirement accounts for the benefit of your child with disabilities. And yes, this trust can distribute money from the special needs trust to an ABLE account. It may be a great opportunity for you to do that and remove any in-home support maintenance or ISOM restrictions, or be able to fund the prepaid card, right? Some of those strategies I will provide more detail on in the third webinar. Another great benefit is, which is different than the ABLE account, right? The ABLE account is great for smaller gifts, right? And surprise gifts. The special needs trust is really the place where if you have larger gifts or inheritances, because there's no limit to how much can go into the special needs trust. Another great benefit of the special needs trust is, depending on the type of trust you use, which I'll get into in just a moment, it's a lot more customizable than the ABLE account. The ABLE accounts are very restricted on the type of investments. They're pre-set up investments, where a special needs trust, if you have a first party or third party special needs trust, is completely customizable. The trustee is customizable, and you can also get professional support. So what are the three different types of special needs trust? Well, there is a first party special needs trust. There is a third party special needs trust, and then there is a pooled trust. Excuse me. A first party special needs trust is a trust funded by the beneficiary themselves. So an example of this is if you were able to work, you then suddenly got in a car accident, but you had savings, and now you realize you're going to have significant healthcare costs for the rest of your life. You need Medicaid services, and you need to protect the assets you have so you don't have, you don't spend them down in a matter of years. Then, or if there is a settlement, say there was a car accident, there was an insurance settlement, that would flow into a first party special needs trust. More often than not, it's a third party special needs trust, and a third party special needs trust is funded by anyone but the beneficiary or your child. So you as the parents, grandparents, family, and friends can pass money into a third party special needs trust. And then lastly, there's pooled trust, and pooled trust can be either a first party or third party special needs trust. When do you consider a standalone first party, third party versus a pooled trust? In my opinion, if you can expect to pass at least $250,000 plus to your child in assets, then it makes sense to go to an estate attorney and open a self-standing first or third party special needs trust. If the expected resources are below that, it may make more sense to use a pooled trust. And the reason for that is it's expensive to manage and also set up a self-standing or standing special needs trust going through an estate attorney. And if you have, let's just say as an example, $20,000 that you expect to pass on, but it's costing $5,000 to $7,000 to set up the trust through the estate attorney, not including the trustee cost, well, then you just use a significant portion of the expected money you hope to go to your child towards just setting it up. Where you could have used a pooled trust or a pooled special needs trust where there's no setup fees, and they will help manage it on your behalf and have the trustee on your behalf. The one downside of the pooled trust is it's less customizable, right? You're going to be using their team. Their team's going to be acting as a trustee, and you aren't going to have a choice of the investments. The investments are all going to be pooled together. That's how this works. They use smaller trusts, pool them all together to save on cost. And they manage it as one trust, but then you have a dedicated rep to be able to provide and look after your son or daughter and make sure that those resources are being used for their benefit. That is going over, again, from the 30,000-foot view, SSI, able accounts, SSDI, and special needs trust, right? Where most often, 18 is that pivotal year for families and people experiencing disabilities. And at 18 is typically when SSI comes into play. And a great tool to utilize if you are concerned about excess cash buildup for your child is to open an ABLE account. An ABLE account is excluded resource for means tested government benefits. And this is a place where you can store excess cash and it can grow tax-free. And then later down the financial road or your financial journey, SSDI may be a factor for you if your child has had limited work history. And then that is typically when you as the parents are retiring. And finally, special needs trust is where inheritances or large gifts go. I do want to remind you that this is being recorded. We will be sending this out, so you will be able to look at it afterwards. I also want to make myself available to each and every one of you, where if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. And as a gift to this webinar, all I ask in return is that you share this with others, right? Share the information you learn, provide the clarity so that others can make wise decisions for their families and let other people know that I'm here. I will be having 2 other webinars. They are the next 2 Wednesdays, the 10th and the 17th at 11 o'clock. We'll be recording those as well, and we'll be sending out the recordings a couple days after each. So you can expect this recording in a matter of a couple days. Now, I do want to open it up for Q&A time. Andrea, could you please help guide the Q&A?
Sure. So we do have a great question that came from the chat, as well as some great questions that came in earlier when people were RSVPing online. So the first question that came in from the chat was, when my child moves from SSI to SSDI, when my wife retires, is the 2,000 max still in place?
Great question. The answer is it depends. And the reason why it depends is it depends on how much SSDI income they're getting per month. So if the SSDI benefits are over and above what they would have received in SSI and your child is no longer receiving any SSI benefits, then the answer is no. But you do need to be careful if you are on CalFresh as well to make sure what the resource limits are there. But if you have a child who, let's just say your SSDI is $500, well, then you may still be getting a complementary SSI benefit. And if you're still getting any SSI benefits, then the answer is yes. So again, you got to look at that really closely to see what is the breakout between SSDI versus SSI.
Great. Another question that came in online was, how would you go about determining how long the money will last? For example, how can we go about figuring out if we, the parents, can enjoy some of our savings now and also provide for our child?
That is a very, very good question, and one that really requires a close look at your situation. And that is exactly what I do in my job and profession. I help you ensure that you have enough for your lifetime, as well as trying to determine how much you need for your child's lifetime and how do you fund that, right? That would require a lot closer look at your personal situation. If that's something you are interested in, feel free to reach out to me and we can set up a meeting to do that.
Okay, and then another question that came in was, can a special needs trust feed an ABLE account?
Yes, a special needs trust can feed an ABLE account. I'm a fan of this. Often you have a trustee on the special needs trust who can be handcuffed on some of the things that they spend money on, or the trustee may have a difficult time, like, hey, how do I pay for going out to Chipotle, right? It's kind of a nuance for the trustee, where if the trustee sent some money to the ABLE account was able to utilize a TrueLink card or a prepaid card, then they can use that Visa prepaid card for things like Chipotle, right? And it kind of becomes more functional and easier to utilize.
Okay, and then are SSI benefits for a minor child dependent upon the parent's income?
Yes. So if you have a minor child, your child would only be eligible for SSI benefits depending on the parent's income and resource limits. So if you are a parent that has really limited income and resources, then SSI might be available to you and the family.
Great. Another question said, my daughter's currently working and does not currently receive anything from Social Security. If something were to happen to her job, would she be able to then go on disability?
Great question. My brother-in-law fits in that exact same camp. My brother-in-law is working at the local grocery store. He is paying into Social Security now. And if he has something happen to him, he would be able to fall back on SSDI based on his own work record. And if SSDI is below what the SSI limit is, then we would also apply for SSI as well. We would work between SSDI and SSI to maximize the benefit income for him or your child. Where you may run into an issue with the SSDI side is if let's just say your son or daughter is working for a government entity that does not pay Social Security taxes. Like my wife is a teacher at the local school. She does not pay into Social Security. Where if she became disabled, we would be looking at other resources. And so for this question, it's likely looking at SSI under that scenario. And then it would be looking at how do we make sure keeping them below the resource limit.
Okay, and then another one from the chat asks, if I have a third-party trust that's to be funded when my wife and I pass away and our son's the executor, is it just a matter of my son opening a bank account in the name of the trust and then all funds flow through the trust?
Great question. So yes, it's likely that you have a special needs trust or a third-party special needs trust that's not in effect yet, right? It's defected until you open your first account. There is a balance between when you should open the first account into the name of the trust. You can do it during your lifetime, or like you just said, the executor or the trustee can do so as soon as something happens to you. That's correct.
Okay, and then our last question is, what's the taxability of special needs trusts?
That is a complex question, and it depends on the type of trust. That would really require looking at the specific trust and the language. If you have higher quality estate attorneys who are experienced in special needs planning, they will work with the trust to ensure that it is taxed at personal tax rates, which is preferable. But sometimes, for example, like a third-party special needs trust is often taxed at trust tax rates, and trust tax rates are inefficient. They're really high. But there are tools and strategies to keep that tax down, such as distributions out to ABLE accounts or distributions out to your child's needs. There are different strategies, but it really requires looking into the trust language and how that trust was funded. So it's not a one-size-fits-all.
Great, I think that's all the questions that we have for now.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Expect to see the recording sent out to you in the next couple of days. If you have further questions, don't hesitate reaching out to us. You can also look at our website with the news and the blogs. And I look forward to hearing and seeing you in the second and third webinar. I hope everyone has a good rest of their day.